A Ray of Hope. Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. The morning sun cast long shadows through the weathered lace curtains of Miss Sarah Johnson's modest Brooklyn brownstone. At 78, she had lived in this same house for over 5 decades, watching the neighborhood transform around her like seasons changing in a garden. The creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper held memories of a lifetime spent nurturing young minds as a dedicated elementary school teacher. Sarah's morning routine remained unchanged despite her retirement 15 years ago. She would wake at precisely 6:30 a.m., make her bed with hospital corners, a habit she never lost from her childhood, and shuffle to the kitchen in her well-worn slippers. The kettle's whistle was often the only sound breaking the morning silence, save for the distant rumble of the subway and the occasional car horn. Her small pension check barely covered the essentials. After paying for utilities, property taxes, and basic groceries, there was little left for anything else. The medical bills from her arthritis treatments had slowly eaten away at her savings, but Sarah never complained. She'd grown up in the segregated South, where complaining about hardship was considered a luxury her parents couldn't afford. The photographs lining her walls told the story of a life richly lived, if not financially rewarded. There she was, the first in her family to graduate college, standing proud in her cap and gown. Another showed her first class of students in 1968, their young faces full of promise. Through the years, many of those students had gone on to become doctors, lawyers, and teachers themselves. Some still sent her Christmas cards, though fewer arrived each year. Living alone had its challenges, but Sarah had developed a system. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen from the corner grocery, would check on her twice a week, bringing fresh vegetables and stories about her grandchildren. The local church group helped with minor house repairs, though the building's aging infrastructure needed more attention than they could provide. Chapter 2. The morning everything changed. That fateful Tuesday morning began like any other. Sarah was watering her windowsill herbs when the first twinge of discomfort appeared in her chest. Initially, she dismissed it as indigestion from last night's dinner. But as the pain intensified, spreading down her left arm like liquid fire, a distant memory surfaced. Her father had described similar symptoms before his heart attack 20 years ago. Her hands trembled as she reached for the ancient rotary phone on her kitchen wall. The same phone she'd had installed in 1975, refusing to upgrade despite her former students' insistence that she needed something more modern. Now, as she struggled to dial 911, each rotation of the dial seemed to take an eternity. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was clear and professional. I think... Sarah paused, fighting to catch her breath. I think I'm having a heart attack. She managed to give her address before the room began to spin. The operator's voice became distant, like someone speaking through water. Stay with me, Miss Johnson. Help is on the way. Can you get to your front door to unlock it? Sarah clutched the phone cord, her knuckles white. Yes, dear. I'll try. Each step toward the door felt like walking through deep sand. The pain in her chest had become a constant pressure, as if someone were sitting on her sternum. The wail of approaching sirens pierced the morning quiet of her street. Mrs. Chen, who had been sweeping her storefront, saw the ambulance and rushed over, still holding her broom. She arrived just as Sarah was struggling with the door lock. Chapter 3. The Emergency Room. The emergency room at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital was a maze of organized chaos. Nurses rushed between curtained beds, monitors beeped incessantly, and somewhere nearby a child was crying. Sarah lay on a gurney, oxygen mask fogging with each labored breath as Dr. Maria Rodriguez examined her. Dr. Rodriguez was younger than most of Sarah's former students, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her white coat bore colorful pins, one a rainbow heart, another promoting voter registration. Miss Johnson, Dr. Rodriguez began, reviewing the EKG results. You've had what we call a mild myocardial infarction, a heart attack. Your quick action in calling 911 likely prevented more severe damage, but we'll need to keep you here for observation and treatment. Sarah's throat tightened, not from her condition, but from the reality of her situation. she whispered, removing her oxygen mask momentarily. I don't have insurance. My Medicare coverage, there are gaps. I can't afford. Dr. Rodriguez gently replaced the oxygen mask. First, let's focus on getting you stabilized. I promise you we'll figure out the rest. We have programs for patients in your situation. She squeezed Sarah's hand, and for a moment, Sarah was reminded of herself in her teaching days, reassuring worried students before big tests. Chapter 4. Angels in White Coats. The cardiac care unit became Sarah's temporary home. Her room, though small, had a window overlooking the hospital's courtyard where pigeons gathered on the ledges. The staff quickly grew fond of their newest patient, drawn to her quiet dignity and the way she always remembered their names and asked about their families. Nurse James, a tall man with broad shoulders and gentle hands, became one of her regular caregivers. He'd grown up in Georgia, just like Sarah, and they bonded over shared memories of sweet tea and summer thunderstorms. During his night shifts, he'd sometimes bring her extra blankets and share stories about his 3 daughters. My youngest, he'd say, adjusting her IV line, she wants to be a teacher, just like you were. Says she wants to make a difference. Sarah would smile, remembering her own early days in the classroom. Tell her it's the hardest job she'll ever love. The night shift ward attendant, Michael, was a college student working his way through pre-med. He reminded Sarah of her former students, eager to learn, full of dreams. During his breaks, he'd sit with her, asking questions about her teaching experiences and sharing his own hopes of becoming a doctor. How did you handle it? He asked one night after a particularly challenging shift. Teaching all those years, making such a small salary? Sarah adjusted her position in bed, wincing slightly. You know, Michael, there are different kinds of wealth. Every time one of my students understood a difficult concept, every time I saw that light of understanding in their eyes, that was worth more than money could buy. Chapter 5. The Social Worker's Mission. Amanda Torres, the hospital's social worker, was a force of nature packed into a 5'2" frame. With 20 years of experience navigating the labyrinthine healthcare system, she approached Sarah's case with determination. Miss Johnson, Amanda said, spreading paperwork across the hospital tray table. I've been reviewing your situation. We have several options. She explained the hospital's charitable care program, various assistance funds, and potential payment plans. The thing is, Amanda continued, pushing her reading glasses up her nose, you've spent your life giving to others. Now it's time to let others help you. Over the next few days, Amanda worked tirelessly, making calls, filling out applications, and advocating on Sarah's behalf. She discovered that Sarah qualified for additional Medicare coverage she hadn't known about and found a foundation that helped retired teachers with medical expenses. Chapter 6. Hidden Blessings. News of Sarah's situation spread through the hospital like ripples in a pond. Dr. Rodriguez mentioned it during a staff meeting, and soon a quiet movement began. Nurses pooled resources to create a care package with comfortable pajamas and toiletries. The cafeteria staff ensured she always got extra portions of her favorite dishes. But it was the unexpected visitors that touched Sarah's heart the most. Former students, having heard about her condition through the local grapevine, began showing up. They came with flowers, cards, and stories of how she had influenced their lives. Marcus Wilson, now a civil rights attorney, brought his teenage daughter to meet the teacher who made me believe in myself. Janet Chen, Mrs. Chen's granddaughter and a pediatric nurse at the same hospital, stopped by during her breaks to check on her grandmother's old friend. Chapter 7. The Healing Process. Recovery was a slow dance of progress and setbacks. Physical therapy sessions left Sarah exhausted but determined. She worked with Lisa, a young physical therapist who had a gift for knowing when to push and when to ease back. My grandmother had a saying, Sarah told Lisa during a particularly challenging session. God never gives you more than you can handle, but sometimes I wish he didn't trust me so much. They both laughed, and somehow the exercises seemed a little easier after that. Dr. Rodriguez monitored Sarah's progress closely, adjusting medications and treatment plans as needed. During their conversations, Sarah learned that the young doctor had grown up in a similar situation, raised by a single mother who had worked as a school janitor. "You remind me of my favorite teacher," Dr. Rodriguez admitted one day. "Mrs. Martinez, she used to stay after school to help me with science projects because she knew I couldn't afford the materials. She's the reason I became a doctor." Chapter 8. A community responds word of Sarah's situation reached beyond the hospital walls. Her former school organized a fundraiser. Local churches took up special collections. The story caught the attention of a local news reporter who had been one of Sarah's students in the 1980s. The resulting article, "A Teacher's Legacy: Community Rallies Around Retired Educator," sparked even more support. A local law firm offered pro bono services to help Sarah navigate her medical benefits. A home healthcare agency volunteered to provide free follow-up care after her discharge. Mrs. Chen organized a schedule of neighbors who would help with meals and housekeeping once Sarah returned home. The local hardware store owner, whose sister had been in Sarah's first class, offered to make needed repairs to her house. Chapter 9. Lessons Learned. As her discharge date approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the experience. The heart attack, frightening as it had been, had revealed something beautiful about her community and the lives she had touched. During her final days in the hospital, she began keeping a journal, recording not just her medical progress but the stories of kindness she witnessed. She wrote about the night janitor who sang gospel songs while mopping the floors, the volunteer who brought therapy dogs to visit patients, and the countless small acts of compassion she observed from her hospital bed. Dr. Rodriguez arranged for Sarah to be part of a cardiac rehabilitation program at no cost, ensuring she would continue to receive the care she needed. Amanda, the social worker, had successfully secured coverage for her medications and follow-up appointments. Chapter 10. A New Chapter. 3. Weeks after she had arrived at the emergency room, Sarah prepared to return home. Her house had been cleaned and repaired by volunteers. A new medical alert system had been installed, donated by a local senior care organization. But Sarah wasn't content to simply receive help. She wanted to give back. During her hospital stay, she had noticed how many elderly patients struggled with similar situations. With Amanda's guidance, she began planning to start a support group at her church for seniors navigating the healthcare system. "You know," she told Dr. Rodriguez during her final checkup, "I always told my students that education never stops. I guess life never stops teaching us lessons either." As she was wheeled out of the hospital, Sarah was greeted by an honor guard of sorts. Nurses, doctors, custodians, and staff members lined the hallway. Many had tears in their eyes, but Sarah's smile was radiant. Michael, the night shift attendant, helped her into Mrs. Chen's waiting car. "Don't forget about us, Miss Johnson," he said. Sarah patted his hand. "Forget? My dear, you've all become part of my story now, and stories are meant to be shared." Epilogue. 6 months later, Sarah's support group had grown from 5 members to 50. She had become a regular speaker at hospital volunteer orientations, sharing her experience to help others understand the patient perspective. Her heart condition, while requiring ongoing management, had stabilized. But the real healing had come from the reminder that she was not alone. The same community she had served for decades had embraced her in her time of need. On warm afternoons, she could often be found in her garden, tending to new flowers planted by her former students. Sometimes neighborhood children would stop by to hear her stories, drawn by her warm smile and gentle wisdom. Dr. Rodriguez still checked on her regularly, as did Amanda and many of the hospital staff who had become friends. Mrs. Chen's daily visits continued, now accompanied by her granddaughter Janet when she was off duty. Sarah had turned her experience into a mission, ensuring that no elderly person in her community felt alone in navigating health challenges. She organized workshops, coordinated volunteers, and became an advocate for patient support programs. "Life," she would tell anyone who would listen, "is like my garden. Sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the most challenging soil, and just like plants need a community of sun, rain, and good earth to thrive, people need each other. We're all connected in this great garden of life." Her story became more than just a tale of survival. It became a testament to the power of community, the importance of compassion, and the enduring impact of a life dedicated to serving others. In the end, the heart that had almost failed her had opened countless other hearts, creating a legacy of love and support that would continue to grow and flourish. As Sarah often said, quoting one of her favorite teaching maxims, "When we help others, we help ourselves. And when we share our stories, we share our humanity." The end